The stars of Hollywood's golden age dazzled audiences with charm, elegance, and timeless performances. But behind the polished images were hidden truths, secrets carefully managed by studios determined to protect their investments. From concealed children and rewritten origins to quiet personal tragedies, these icons lived under immense pressure to appear perfect. Today, we uncover the private stories they were never allowed to share. Here are 25 of the darkest family secrets hidden by the stars who helped build Hollywood's dream machine, truths that were buried for decades behind fame, glamour, and the studio system's silent rules. Hidden daughter raised as a stranger. For decades, one of the most remarkable cover-ups in Hollywood stayed buried beneath carefully crafted smiles and staged photographs. A child born out of a fleeting romance between two screen legends was kept in the shadows, her true identity masked to protect their reputations and careers. In 1935, while filming The Call of the Wild, Loretta Young and Clark Gable became romantically involved. Gable was already married, and Young, a devout Catholic, faced intense pressure to maintain a virtuous public image. When she discovered she was pregnant, she made the painful decision to retreat from the spotlight, giving birth in secret to a baby girl named Judy. To avoid public scandal, the infant was placed in an orphanage for over a year. When Young brought her back, she presented the child as adopted, carefully crafting a narrative that would remain in place for decades. To further disguise the truth, Young even arranged for her daughter to undergo a cosmetic procedure to alter her ears, which resembled Gable's distinct features. Judy Lewis grew up surrounded by whispers and questions. Although she noticed how closely she resembled Gable, her mother denied any biological connection. Gable himself never acknowledged her, though the two reportedly met once when Judy was a teenager, an encounter that left her emotionally shaken. It wasn't until Judy was in her early 30s that she confronted her mother and finally learned the truth. In her memoir, Uncommon Knowledge, she revealed how the secrecy shaped her identity and relationships. Loretta Young, later in life, admitted the truth privately and expressed regret for the deception, but publicly she remained guarded. This story isn't just about a hidden child, it's a reflection of the immense societal and studio pressure placed on actresses of the era, forcing them to choose between honesty and survival in a world that demanded perfection. The heiress nobody was supposed to know about. Every so often, a whisper escapes from behind Hollywood's golden curtain that causes people to question everything they thought they knew. One such whisper involved a woman named Patricia Lake, a socialite who for most of her life was believed to be the niece of screen legend Marion Davies. But behind that convenient family label was a far more complicated and deeply concealed truth. Marion Davies was not only a major film star, but also the longtime partner of media tycoon William Randolph Hearst. Their relationship was the subject of endless speculation, not least because Hearst remained married to another woman. It was within this delicate arrangement that a child was quietly born in 1919 during a trip to Europe. Officially, the baby was said to be the daughter of Marion's sister, but those close to the family, friends, staff, and even some journalists suspected otherwise. Patricia Lake was raised in privilege, always close to Davies and treated more like a daughter than a niece. The press didn't question it. Hearst's influence made sure of that. Rumors persisted, but no one dared challenge the official story. Patricia herself never spoke publicly about the speculation, remaining loyal to the carefully preserved narrative throughout her life. It wasn't until her final days in 1993 that Patricia broke the silence. On her deathbed, she reportedly confessed that she was, in fact, the biological daughter of Marion Davies and William Randolph Hearst. The admission confirmed what many had long suspected, but were never allowed to say aloud. While no formal documentation ever emerged to verify the claim, her words carried the weight of a lifetime spent living under a false identity. This story adds another layer to the complex and often hidden personal lives of Hollywood's elite. In an era when public image mattered more than truth, even the existence of a child could be recast to protect reputations. And for Patricia Lake, it meant living her entire life as someone she was not. Until the very end. The diary that nearly destroyed a star. In the eyes of the public, she was the picture of grace and elegance, but a private notebook hidden in her home told a very different story, one that would almost bring her career to a standstill. This was the reality Mary Astor faced when her personal life collided with a bitter custody battle that exposed her most intimate thoughts to the world. Mary Astor, best known for roles in films like The Maltese Falcon, became the center of a scandal in 1936 during a courtroom dispute over custody of her young daughter. Her estranged husband, Dr. Franklin Thorpe, had discovered her private diary and intended to use it as evidence against her. The journal, which reportedly detailed romantic relationships and private opinions about her Hollywood peers, quickly became the focal point of the case. While the diary was never officially published, descriptions from the court proceedings suggested it contained passages that could severely damage Astor's image. The media pounced, labeling it the Purple Diary, and turning the legal battle into front-page news. Audiences were stunned. How could one of their most beloved actresses become embroiled in such a salacious controversy? Behind the scenes, Astor was devastated. She feared not just losing custody of her daughter, but also the career she had worked so hard to build. Studios watched closely, concerned that public backlash could make her box office poison. Yet, through her testimony and the support of colleagues, Astor managed to protect what mattered most to her. The court ultimately granted her custody, and the diary was sealed from public view. Though the experience took a deep emotional toll, it did not end her career. In fact, Astor rebounded with stronger roles and eventually earned an Academy Award. But the shadow of the scandal never fully disappeared. The incident became a defining moment in her life, a personal document nearly destroying everything she had built. A leading man's carefully constructed illusion. At the height of his fame, he was the embodiment of strength, charm, and masculinity. Audiences adored him, and studios promoted him as the perfect gentleman, ideal for romance roles and respected by all. But behind the cameras, Rock Hudson carried a truth that Hollywood wasn't ready to face, and one that would remain hidden for most of his life. During the 1950s, Hudson's popularity skyrocketed, and so did speculation about his personal life. Studio executives, fearful that any deviation from the public's expectations could jeopardize their investment, orchestrated a strategy to protect his image. In 1955, when rumors grew louder, Hudson's agent arranged a marriage between the actor and Phyllis Gates, his secretary. The union was brief, lasting only a few years, but it served its purpose. The marriage allowed Hudson to maintain his public persona while quietly continuing his personal life away from the spotlight. Gates later wrote a book about their time together, claiming she had no idea their relationship was arranged. Others close to the star suggested it was widely understood within the industry that this was a protective measure. For decades, Hudson remained a fixture in American entertainment, beloved for films like Pillow Talk and Giant. His off-screen life remained largely private until much later. It wasn't until 1985, when Hudson publicly shared a health diagnosis, that his carefully preserved public image was re-examined, and with it, the quiet sacrifices he had made. A romance too risky for the spotlight. In a time when appearances meant everything, some relationships were simply too complicated to survive public scrutiny. For one beloved actor, maintaining his carefully groomed image meant suppressing a love story that could never be acknowledged, especially not by the studios who built his fame. Tab Hunter was the picture-perfect heartthrob of the 1950s. With his blonde hair, bright smile, and all-American charm, he became a favorite in teen magazines and romantic comedies. But beneath that polished exterior was a man living a life that didn't align with the persona crafted for him. Hunter's most significant relationship during the height of his fame was with fellow actor Anthony Perkins, known for his later role in Psycho. Their connection was genuine, but it existed entirely behind closed doors. Both men were under constant pressure to present themselves as eligible bachelors. Publicists arranged dates with actresses for press photos, and interviews emphasized their interest in settling down with the right woman. Any deviation from the expected narrative risked not only their careers, but also their personal safety in a time of rigid cultural norms. Hunter later wrote candidly about this period in his memoir, revealing the emotional strain of living a double life. He described how their bond had to be hidden at all costs, even though they longed for something more honest. Perkins, too, faced similar pressures, and the two drifted apart as their careers demanded increasing levels of secrecy. What makes their story so compelling is how unremarkable it might seem today. Two people simply in love, But in the golden age of Hollywood, their relationship had to be erased, even as it shaped who they were behind the scenes. It was a reminder that the spotlight could illuminate fame, but it could also cast long shadows over the truth. A new name to fit the studio mold. What audiences saw on the screen was grace, glamour, and a name that would become iconic. But that transformation didn't happen by chance. It was orchestrated from the top down by a studio eager to reshape reality. Behind one of Hollywood's most admired actresses was a painful story of reinvention, identity loss, and a haunting family past. Born Margarita Carmen Cancino, the future star grew up in a family of performers. Her father, a Spanish-born dancer, quickly recognized her talent and began including her in his shows while she was still a child. As she grew into a young woman, her natural beauty and skill caught the attention of Columbia Pictures, where studio head Harry Cohn saw potential, but also a problem. At the time, Hollywood executives believed that certain ethnic backgrounds wouldn't sell to mainstream American audiences. So, Margarita was given a new name, Rita Hworth. Her hairline was altered through painful electrolysis to appear less traditionally Spanish. Her dark hair was dyed auburn, and her biography was rewritten to remove any mention of her Latina heritage. From that point forward, she was presented as a different person altogether. But the changes were more than cosmetic. While the world fell in love with the sultry persona seen in Gilda, the real Rita carried deep emotional scars. As a child, she had been subjected to inappropriate boundaries while performing alongside her father, a trauma she rarely spoke about. Those early experiences shaped her adult relationships, often marked by insecurity and a desire to please. To the public, she was radiant and confident. Privately, she once lamented, "They go to bed with Gilda and wake up with me." That single sentence revealed the painful disconnect between her public image and her private reality. A woman who had been molded by others and left to reconcile the fragments of who she truly was. The mother Hollywood wanted you to see. She was the embodiment of glamour, discipline, and drive, an icon who reinvented herself time and again to stay on top in Hollywood. Joan Crawford crafted a public image as the perfect working mother, adopting 4 children and showcasing a home filled with order and affection. But behind the polished photos and press clippings, a different story was unfolding, one that would only come to light after her death. Crawford's image as a devoted mother was heavily promoted by the studios and reinforced through countless fan magazine features. Her children, dressed impeccably, stood beside her in posed portraits that echoed the era's ideal of family perfection. Yet, according to her eldest adopted daughter, Christina, the truth behind those glossy images was much darker. In 1978, Christina published a memoir titled Mommy Dearest, detailing a childhood marked by emotional volatility, manipulation, and harsh discipline. She described rigid rules, sudden outbursts, and physical punishments, highlighted most famously by an incident involving wire hangers that became symbolic of her claims. The book painted a stark contrast between the loving mother the public adored and the unpredictable figure Christina remembered. The memoir sparked controversy. Some close to Crawford, including her younger children, denied the accusations, insisting she had been a firm but caring parent. Others suggested that elements of truth likely existed within both accounts. Regardless, the book forever altered Crawford's legacy, forcing fans to reconsider the line between Hollywood's image-making and the reality behind closed doors. A child hidden to protect a studio star. To audiences, she was the picture of elegance, her delicate features and graceful performances making her a favorite of critics and fans alike. But Jean Tierney's carefully maintained public image masked one of the most painful secrets of her life, a daughter born with severe disabilities, hidden away not out of shame, but to preserve the career she had worked so hard to build. In 1943, while pregnant with her first child, Tierney contracted rubella during a public appearance at the Hollywood Canteen. At the time, she had no idea of the risks the virus posed to her unborn baby. When her daughter Daria was born, it became clear that something was wrong. The child was later diagnosed with serious developmental and physical challenges, including partial blindness and deafness. Tierney was devastated. The studios, eager to protect her image as a rising romantic lead, discouraged her from revealing the truth. Daria was placed in a private care facility, and the subject was largely avoided in press coverage. Tierney rarely spoke publicly about her daughter, though privately she carried the weight of that experience for the rest of her life. The emotional toll of the secrecy and her own sense of guilt eventually led to a collapse in Tierney's mental health. She withdrew from acting multiple times and was treated for depression at various clinics over the years. It wasn't until much later in life that she openly acknowledged what had happened, speaking candidly about her struggles in her memoir. A love story that sparked headlines. Some Hollywood stories are so sensational, they blur the line between scandal and legend. For Gloria Graham, a talented actress known for her sultry screen presence, one personal decision would overshadow her career and ignite a media storm that lasted for decades. In the 1940s, Graham married director Nicholas Ray, with whom she had a son. Their marriage was short-lived, and after their separation, Graham's personal life grew increasingly complicated. Years later, it emerged that she had developed a relationship with Ray's son from a previous marriage, Anthony Ray, who had once been her teenage stepson. Reports circulated that their romantic involvement may have started while Anthony was still a teenager, though the timeline remains unclear. What is certain is that, in 1960, Graham married him. The revelation stunned Hollywood. The idea that she had wed her former stepson, someone she had helped raise, turned her from a respected star into a target for tabloid headlines. The scandal took a toll on her reputation, and roles became harder to secure. Though Graham and Anthony remained married for over a decade and had children together, the shadow of their unconventional union lingered long after their split. Many in the industry distanced themselves, and the story followed her for the rest of her life. Yet those who knew her described a woman fiercely independent and unafraid to live on her own terms. Gloria Graham's life was messy, bold, and undeniably human, qualities that gave depth to her performances, even as her personal choices cost her dearly in the court of public opinion. A teenage bride and a studio crisis. At the height of his fame, he was considered a genius, an innovator who helped shape the language of cinema. But off-screen, Charlie Chaplin's personal life veered into territory that even the most skilled publicist couldn't fully contain. One of the darkest chapters involved a scandalous marriage, emotional turmoil, and a decision that would haunt those involved. In 1924, at the age of 35, Chaplin married 16-year-old Rita Gray, an actress he had worked with previously. The relationship began in secrecy, and when Gray became pregnant, Chaplin hastily proposed to avoid legal repercussions and protect his public image. Their marriage, fraught with tension from the beginning, quickly spiraled into a storm of accusations and resentment. According to court documents and Gray's later accounts, the marriage was emotionally damaging. She described Chaplin as controlling and unpredictable, someone who oscillated between charm and cruelty. Under pressure from both Chaplin and studio fixers, Gray was allegedly urged to quietly end a second pregnancy during their troubled union. The couple's divorce became one of the most explosive in Hollywood history, with intimate details making headlines. Though Chaplin eventually recovered professionally, the scandal left a permanent mark. Gray, meanwhile, spent years reclaiming her story, speaking openly in later life about the emotional cost of being thrust into a relationship she was unprepared for. Her account became a cautionary tale about power imbalances and the silent sacrifices made behind Hollywood's golden curtain. Roles, image, and private sacrifice. Known for her piercing gaze and commanding performances, Bette Davis projected strength and independence on screen. But behind the scenes, she navigated a system that often demanded personal sacrifices in exchange for professional success. Like many of her peers, Davis faced impossible choices imposed not by fate, but by the powerful studios that controlled her every move. During her early years at Warner Brothers, Davis was seen as a rising star with immense potential. But as her roles became more prominent, so did the pressure to preserve a certain public image, one of unattached glamour, availability, and unshakable ambition. Romantic relationships, family plans, and personal desires were often discouraged or strictly managed. Multiple sources, including Hollywood biographies and accounts from insiders, suggest that Davis was urged, possibly more than once, to end pregnancies for the sake of her career. The reasoning was clear. Motherhood might interrupt filming schedules, diminish her public appeal, or threaten the fantasy the studios were selling to audiences. Davis herself remained largely silent on the issue, never publicly confirming the rumors. Still, whispers persisted, supported by similar stories from actresses like Joan Crawford and Jean Harlo. These accounts point to a larger pattern of studio interference in women's personal lives. For Davis, the ambition that fueled her career may have come at a deeply personal cost. One she never openly addressed, but one that colored the tension in many of her most emotionally charged performances. A star's image protected at all costs. She was the original blonde bombshell, radiant, bold, and the embodiment of 1930s Hollywood allure. But Jean Harlo's career wasn't only about spotlight and style, it also revealed how far studios would go to maintain a star's image, even when it meant erasing parts of their personal lives. At just 21, Harlo had already captivated audiences with roles in films like Red Dust and Dinner at 8. As her fame soared, so did her influence. But behind the screen, her life was tightly controlled by studio executives who saw her as an asset to be managed. One particularly painful episode illustrates just how invasive that control could become. When Harlo fell in love and planned to marry actor William Powell, it was reported that she became pregnant. But the marriage never happened. Instead, studio insiders allegedly intervened, insisting the timing was wrong for her career. To preserve her bombshell status, she was said to have undergone a medical procedure under the pretense of illness, presented publicly as a hospitalization due to a minor health concern. The incident was never officially confirmed, and Harlo, ever the consummate professional, never spoke of it publicly. Still, biographies and insider accounts have continued to highlight this as one of several instances where the studio's control over personal decisions shaped the trajectory of a star's life. A heritage hidden behind a Hollywood mask. Audiences saw a refined, exotic beauty on the screen, someone who radiated elegance and mystery. But for Merl Oberon, maintaining her image meant concealing a deeply personal truth about her origins, one she kept hidden for most of her life. Born in Bombay in 1911, Oberon's early life was marked by complexity. She was of mixed heritage, Anglo-Indian, and raised in a world that still bore the rigid structures of colonial identity. Her biological mother was a young Indian teenager, but to avoid scandal and racial prejudice, she was passed off as Oberon's servant. A woman introduced as her mother was actually her grandmother. As Oberon pursued an acting career in Europe and later in Hollywood, the truth about her background became a carefully guarded secret, at a time when leading ladies were expected to embody a very specific, often Eurocentric standard of beauty. Any trace of non-European ancestry could derail a career. To fit the mold, studios rewrote her biography, claiming she was born in Tasmania, Australia, and of entirely white British descent. Oberon herself reinforced the narrative, even after reaching stardom in films like The Scarlet Pimpernel and Wuthering Heights. Makeup artists used lighter foundation to soften her naturally darker complexion, and publicists avoided references to her upbringing in India. The weight of hiding her identity took a toll, especially in private interviews, where she deflected questions about her past. It wasn't until decades later, long after her death, that documents and interviews confirmed what had long been speculated. Merl Oberon had lived her life behind a mask, crafted not by choice, but by a system that valued illusion over truth. A tragedy silenced by power. In the glimmering shadow of William Randolph Hearst's media empire stood Marion Davies, a comedic actress often remembered for her charm, her lavish lifestyle, and her complicated relationship with the powerful newspaper tycoon. But among the grand estates and glittering parties lay a painful family secret, carefully buried by the machinery of Hearst's influence. Davies was more than just a companion to Hearst. She was a devoted aunt to her niece, Pippi Lederer, a young woman who briefly lived among the opulence of the Hearst castle. Pippi, like her aunt, was surrounded by Hollywood's high society, but behind the glamour, she struggled emotionally. In the 1930s, Pippi was institutionalized after her behavior became increasingly erratic, an experience that ended in tragedy. Not long after being placed in a sanitarium, Pippi lost her life under unclear circumstances. Rumors circulated that the death was self-inflicted, though official accounts were vague. What made the situation even more troubling was the way the press handled, or rather, ignored, the incident. With Hearst's tight grip on media coverage, the story was swiftly buried, barely mentioned in the papers, and quickly forgotten by the public. Davies never spoke publicly about the loss, and few details ever emerged. Whether out of shame, fear, or a desperate attempt to protect the family's image, the incident was effectively erased from her narrative. Revelations that emerged after death. In life, they were admired for their charm and charisma, two Golden Age stars who captivated audiences on both sides of the Atlantic. But it was only after their passing that some of the most startling stories emerged, revealing aspects of Hollywood culture that had long been hidden. David Niven and Errol Flynn each left behind memoirs and accounts that lifted the curtain on a world few dared to expose. David Niven, known for his refined wit and gentlemanly demeanor, published The Moon's A Balloon, a memoir filled with anecdotes that walked a fine line between amusing and revealing. Among them were subtle nods to the hedonistic environment behind Hollywood's polished exterior. Niven hinted at a culture of unchecked behavior, power imbalances, and emotional damage that many stars simply accepted as the cost of fame. Errol Flynn, on the other hand, had long been a figure of controversy. Even during his lifetime, rumors swirled about his personal conduct. But the stories took on a darker tone after his death, when biographers and former acquaintances began sharing disturbing accounts. These included tales of inappropriate relationships and reckless behavior, accounts that painted a far more complicated picture than the dashing persona he presented on screen. What tied both men together wasn't just their fame, but the way their stories revealed a deeper truth, that many Hollywood icons lived dual lives. What fans saw was carefully orchestrated. What happened off-screen often stayed buried until the memoirs, journals, and posthumous interviews began to pull those secrets into the light. A relationship hidden in plain sight. In the golden age of Hollywood, personal lives were often edited as carefully as film scripts. Studios crafted the public images of their stars, and any deviation from the expected norm was swiftly erased or denied. For Norma Shearer, a celebrated actress with a polished reputation, rumors swirled about a relationship that couldn't be openly acknowledged. Whispers around Hollywood suggested that Shearer had a close, possibly romantic connection with fellow screen legend Greta Garbo. Both women were icons of their era, Shearer with her refined charm and Garbo with her haunting mystique. Their bond, some said, went beyond friendship and was treated as one of the industry's worst-kept secrets. But the pressures of image and expectation meant that any deeper connection between them was never confirmed. Studio executives were notoriously intolerant of anything that didn't align with their strict moral codes. For leading ladies like Shearer and Garbo, even private affection could become a liability if it conflicted with the roles they were expected to play off-screen. Biographers and film historians have since pointed to various clues: shared time on studio lots, emotional closeness, and patterns in Shearer's personal choices, as evidence of something more. Still, neither woman ever spoke directly about the nature of their relationship, and the truth remains somewhere between speculation and silence. A love kept in the shadows. To the outside world, he was the strong, brooding star of the silver screen, often cast as the embodiment of masculinity and restraint. But Spencer Tracy's real life was far more complicated than the carefully curated image that Hollywood projected. For decades, he maintained a quiet yet deeply emotional relationship with Katharine Hepburn, one that defied the conventions of both love and reputation. Tracy remained legally married throughout his life to his wife, Louise, with whom he had 2 children. However, their marriage had long ceased to function in any traditional sense. Tracy, a devout Catholic, refused to divorce, citing religious convictions. Despite this, his emotional life found a new center in Hepburn, who became his closest companion and confidant. Their bond, though profound, was never officially acknowledged in public during Tracy's lifetime. The two never lived openly as a couple, and rarely appeared together in public outside of film sets. Still, their chemistry in movies like Guess Who's Coming to Dinner hinted at a deeper connection that audiences sensed, even if it was never confirmed. Hepburn later admitted that their relationship was one of patience and quiet understanding, She respected Tracy's commitments, and in return, he relied on her during his bouts of poor health and private struggles. She even cared for him during his final years, though few knew of the depth of their bond until after his passing. The son who vanished from the spotlight. To fans, she was the tough, whip-smart queen who could hold her own against any leading man. But behind Barbara Stanwyck's confident on-screen presence was a more complicated personal story, one involving a son whose existence is often forgotten in the retelling of her legacy. In the 1930s, while married to fellow actor Frank Fay, Stanwyck adopted a baby boy. At the time, it was seen as a positive step, adding dimension to the image of the rising star. But soon after the couple divorced, the narrative changed. Stanwyck, now a single mother with a demanding career, reportedly began distancing herself from her son, Dion. As Stanwyck's fame grew, Dion became more and more absent from public view. He was raised largely by others, with minimal contact from his mother. By the time he was an adult, the distance between them had become emotional as well as physical. Though some insiders described their relationship as strained, Stanwyck never publicly discussed the details. Later in life, Dion was reportedly excluded from her will, sparking speculation about the nature of their bond, or lack thereof. Some believed Stanwyck felt she had done what she could under difficult circumstances. Others suggested she had always prioritized her career over motherhood, a choice quietly supported by the era's expectations of leading ladies. Whatever the truth, the silence surrounding her adopted son stands in sharp contrast to the vivid, outspoken characters Stanwyck portrayed. It's a reminder that even the most visible stars often carried the weight of hidden heartbreaks the public never fully understood. Raised by a lie that changed everything. He was a beloved crooner with a boyish charm and an unmistakable voice. But Bobby Darin's personal story held a twist no one saw coming. For much of his life, he believed he was raised by a loving mother and doting sister in the Bronx. It wasn't until adulthood that he learned the truth, and it shook the foundation of his identity. Darin had always been close to his sister, Nina, and his mother, Polly. They were his support system as he pursued his musical and acting career, eventually rising to fame with hits like Mac the Knife and film roles in Come September. But in the 1960s, a family secret emerged that would change everything. He discovered that Polly, the woman he had always called his mother, was actually his grandmother. Nina, the woman he believed to be his sister, was in fact his biological mother. She had given birth to him as a teenager, unmarried and fearful of the social backlash that came with unwed motherhood at the time. To shield the family from scandal, the roles were swapped, and the truth was hidden for decades. The revelation came as a shock. Friends said Darin struggled emotionally with the news, feeling unmoored and betrayed. His entire understanding of his upbringing had been a carefully maintained illusion, born from a desire to protect reputations in an unforgiving era. Though he continued to perform and appear in films, those close to him believed the secret took a lasting emotional toll. It's a story not just about deception, but about the complicated choices families made to survive in a society obsessed with appearances. A sister who was really his mother. He was one of Hollywood's most enigmatic talents, known for his intense performances and quiet cool. But Jack Nicholson's most surprising role wasn't on screen. It was the one he unknowingly lived for more than 3 decades. Behind the charm and charisma was a hidden truth about his own family, one that remained buried until a journalist began digging. Nicholson was raised in New Jersey, believing that his grandmother was his mother and that his real mother, June, was his older sister. The deception began in the 1930s, when June became pregnant as a teenager. Fearing social scandal and judgment, the family chose to raise the child, Jack, as June's younger brother. It was a decision rooted in the era's harsh attitudes toward unwed motherhood. For years, Nicholson accepted the family structure without question. He grew up in a working-class household, unaware that the woman who he thought was his fun-loving sister was actually his biological mother. The truth only surfaced in 1974, when a Time magazine journalist uncovered public records during an interview for a cover story. By that point, both June and her mother had passed away, leaving Nicholson to grapple with the revelation alone. Nicholson later admitted he was stunned, but ultimately accepted the truth with a sense of grace. Still, the impact of such a profound secret was unmistakable. It forced him to reevaluate his own past and offered a rare, deeply human insight into the life of a star often known for keeping his personal world tightly guarded. A silent childhood shaped by love and loss. In a world driven by dialogue and dramatic expression, Lon Chaney Sr. became a master of silence. Known as the Man of a Thousand Faces, he captivated audiences with haunting performances in The Phantom of the Opera and The Hunchback of Notre Dame. But few knew that his talent for physical storytelling came from a deeply personal place, his childhood home, where words were scarce and communication meant something else entirely. Both of Chaney's parents were deaf. From an early age, he learned to speak not with words but through gestures, expressions, and movement. Sign language wasn't just a tool for him, it was the foundation of his entire emotional world. In many ways, Chaney's upbringing shaped his artistry more than any formal training ever could. Growing up in 19th century Colorado, Chaney faced social stigma and misunderstanding. At the time, deafness was poorly understood, and families like his were often marginalized. But rather than retreat, Chaney found strength in his unique background. He became a natural performer, using his body as his voice, crafting a style that would one day revolutionize silent film. His roles were often ones of isolation, pain, or transformation, emotions he seemed to channel with uncanny precision. Behind the prosthetics and elaborate makeup were performances rooted in empathy, formed by a lifetime of quiet observation and non-verbal connection. Chaney rarely spoke publicly about his family, perhaps out of a desire to protect them, or simply because he didn't need to. His legacy remains one of the most powerful examples of how personal hardship can fuel breathtaking artistry. A fabricated family to hide the truth. He was best known as the stoic and clever defense attorney Perry Mason, admired by millions of television viewers. But Raymond Burr's personal life was something entirely different, a carefully constructed fiction that only unraveled after his passing. What the public knew about him during his prime was a version curated to fit the moral standards of mid-century Hollywood. Throughout his career, Burr spoke often about a tragic past that included a deceased wife and a son who had passed away from illness. These stories evoked sympathy and gave his life an air of quiet sorrow. But biographers and journalists later discovered that none of these individuals ever existed. There were no records of a wife or child. The entire narrative, it turned out, had been fabricated. The truth, according to those who knew him best, was that Burr lived a long and devoted life with a male partner, Robert Benavides. In an industry that demanded rigid conformity, especially regarding personal relationships, Burr chose to create an alternate version of himself, one that protected both his privacy and his career. The fictional backstory wasn't just a lie, it was a survival tactic. Hollywood in the 1950s and 60s was unforgiving to those who didn't match its public ideals. By inventing a traditional family, Burr avoided scrutiny and preserved his status as a leading man. It wasn't until after his death in 1993 that the full truth emerged. While some fans were shocked, others admired the quiet dignity with which he had lived. Behind the fiction was a man trying to carve out happiness on his own terms, even if the world wasn't ready to accept it. A scandal that led to exile. She was a symbol of elegance, intelligence, and cinematic brilliance. But when Ingrid Bergman followed her heart rather than the expectations of Hollywood, the consequences were swift and brutal. What began as a love affair would soon ignite one of the most explosive scandals in film history, one that left her reputation in tatters and her career in exile. In the late 1940s, while still married, Bergman traveled to Italy to work with director Roberto Rossellini. Their collaboration was electric, on and off the screen. As they fell in love, Bergman became pregnant with his child. The news broke before any divorce had been finalized, causing a firestorm in the American press. The reaction was intense. Bergman, once adored by audiences for roles in classics like Casablanca and Gaslight, was suddenly vilified. Politicians denounced her on the floor of the U.S. Senate. Sponsors dropped her. She was branded immoral, not just for the affair, but for embracing motherhood outside of marriage in an era of strict social codes. As a result, Bergman left the U.S. and began a new chapter of her career in Europe. She married Rossellini and focused on raising her child, away from the glare of Hollywood's judgmental eye. Though the couple eventually separated, Bergman slowly rebuilt her career, returning to American film years later with the grace and power that had once defined her. Her story became one of resilience, a woman who refused to apologize for following her heart, even when it cost her everything. In the end, her talent outlasted the scandal, but the memory of how quickly Hollywood turned on her remains a chilling lesson in the price of defiance. Whispers of a Hidden Child. She was known as America's sweetheart, the darling of early Hollywood, with golden curls and a smile that lit up silent screens. But even Mary Pickford, a symbol of purity and innocence, was not immune to the era's determination to keep personal scandals under wraps. Among the quietest rumors surrounding her legacy is the possibility of a child she never publicly acknowledged. In the 1920s, Pickford was at the height of her fame, both as an actress and a pioneering film executive. She had recently married Douglas Fairbanks, forming Hollywood's first true power couple. But behind the glamour and public adoration were whispers of a secret, one involving an alleged affair that may have resulted in a child born outside of marriage. Studio fixers during that time were known for managing reputations with swift efficiency. If a pregnancy threatened the image of a star, steps were often taken to quietly resolve the issue and ensure the press never found out. While no concrete evidence has surfaced, multiple biographers have pointed to suspicious gaps in timelines, hushed family conversations, and industry insiders who hinted at a child being raised away from public view. Pickford never spoke of such a possibility. Her carefully controlled public image left little room for questions. Yet, the rumor persisted, buried beneath decades of admiration and studio protection. Whether true or not, the story reflects the intense pressures placed on female stars to appear flawless, even if it meant hiding parts of themselves. For someone as powerful and beloved as Pickford, even a private truth may have been too risky to share. A career-protecting medical decision. Jeanette MacDonald was one of MGM's brightest stars, elegant, poised, and the embodiment of the ideal leading lady. But behind her sophisticated charm was a deeply personal choice made not for herself, but to preserve the image the studio had crafted so carefully. It's a story that speaks volumes about how tightly Hollywood once controlled the lives of its most marketable talents. In the early 1940s, MacDonald was romantically involved with fellow singer and actor Nelson Eddy. Though their relationship was never publicly confirmed, it was well known among industry insiders. At the height of their careers, rumors began circulating that MacDonald was pregnant. But such news didn't fit the carefully manufactured personas MGM had built for both stars. Studio executives worried that a child would interfere with MacDonald's image as the pristine soprano and disrupt future projects, reportedly pressured her into making a medical decision to quietly end the pregnancy. The procedure was conducted under the guise of illness, with public statements pointing to fatigue or minor health issues. MacDonald never confirmed the event, and the studio maintained its silence. But decades later, private letters and interviews with close friends hinted at the toll it took on her emotionally. Eddy, too, was said to be devastated, though he continued to work alongside her in their beloved musical collaborations like Maytime and Sweethearts. The story is not just about what was lost, but about what had to be hidden to survive in a system that placed perfection above truth. For MacDonald, that meant quietly setting aside her personal hopes to meet an impossible standard. From concealed family ties to relationships buried beneath the glitz, the golden age of Hollywood was a masterclass in illusion, not just on screen, but in life itself. These stars weren't just acting in films. They were performing carefully curated identities crafted by powerful studios, strict moral codes, and an unforgiving public. Each secret wasn't simply a private matter. It was a threat to careers, reputations, and entire legacies. Yet, in peeling back these hidden layers, we uncover something far more human. The struggles for love, acceptance, identity, and truth, universal emotions, made even more poignant under the harsh lights of fame. These weren't just stars. They were sons, daughters, lovers, and parents navigating choices no script could have prepared them for. If you found these untold stories compelling, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more forgotten Hollywood history. And let us know in the comments, which of these hidden secrets shocked you the most?